how many of you identify not necessarily with like having to always do something, but doing things last minute and like feeling so stimulated by it? That's literally all of us, right? Beautiful, including myself. So when we do things last minute, can everybody agree that's when our stimulus is almost at its highest? Because that's when there's pressure, there's expectation, there's like, oh my God, I have to fucking like drive my head into the wall to do it, right? So can all of us agree that there's like an extremely high level of stimulus? Now, I don't even want to tell you the physiological like problems of that, because the amount of adrenaline and cortisol that's running through our blood is like, oh my God, I can't even like tell you what it's doing to our bloodstream, our muscles, our digestion, to everything. Our stomach is off, right? We don't want to eat when we're doing shit last minute. And if we eat, the stomach's off anyway. So it's like either ways, it's not processing food. We're not happy people. Oh, come to me, let me love you. Well, like, get the fuck out of my way. I need to get this done, right? So everything about who we are is not necessarily very lovable. It's not very open, accepting. It's not peaceful and grounded. So then why the fuck are we doing it so much? Perfectionism, the needing to do it all the last minute, all of that is just coping mechanisms. It's all just, adding sprinkles on the big part of like the deal, which is the cake. And the cake is that our nervous systems are so addicted to that level of being emotionally and physically and adrenaline wise heightened, that if we don't get it, we don't feel alive. If we don't get it, we don't feel valuable enough. We don't feel like we're human. We don't feel like we're important. So then the next question comes, well, who the fuck told us it feels like this to be human? Drum roll, our childhood trauma. Because of the episodes of what we went through, we feel like the only way we can really exist is when there's such a heightened level of that stimulus, that now what happens is we get addicted to that level of stimulus. We actually get addicted to the feeling of, I'm afraid of failure. You know how fucked up that sounds? We're addicted to the fear of failure. So then we'll overdrive ourselves to thinking we're going to reach success, which ultimately doesn't necessarily happen because of how much we've driven our bodies and our minds into the ground. So it's like a cyclical process of self-sabotage that we get into. Think about it in relationships. Where is it specifically within relationships show up? How many of us have experienced when a person is not really good for me, the sex is fucking phenomenal? Take the same thing and let's attribute it to last minute work, which really fucking stresses me out, isn't really good for me. Those two are exactly the same thing, doing exactly the same thing for your body. Now, this may sound crazy and fucked up, but it's also very hopeful, because you don't need to target the concept of procrastination, so to speak, and say like, hey, how do I like particularly like target my work thing? You just need to target your addiction to chaos. And when you target your addiction to chaos, what this chaos here is, and this is what's really important, is it's the addiction to high levels of adrenaline and cortisol running through your system. That is what tells you you can't do your shit ahead of time. Why? Because if you did your shit like a week in advance, you don't have that excitement of adrenaline, and you don't have that fucking feeling of cortisol running through your system either. So you're like, wow, this is fucking boring. I feel like that all the time. I promise you, I felt like that all the time. Like, you know what? Why am I doing this so far in advance? It makes no sense. But our ego will excuse it and say, I don't feel alive, which is why we also find relationships which are safe boring. Exactly. Because our addiction to chaos and our nervous system's addiction to this fucking heightened level of adrenaline and cortisol will find safe and quote unquote good relationships for us boring. So we'll be addicted to the bad guy. We'll love the sex from the guy who doesn't text us. The person who makes us chase them will be like, oh my God, this is my dream individual. Because that level of chaos is what we're like, oh yeah, this is going to be the one. I'm going to tattoo their name. I'm going to tattoo their names right on my chest because they're my dream person who I love forever and ever and ever. Meanwhile, the next day they're like, yeah, see ya, bye. So why this is so helpful? Because for me, when I studied this and I came across it, I was like, holy fuck me. This is like how I've been living for so long. And I'm basically telling myself I'm in love with all the shit that's not good for me. So now the question is, how do I change, right? That's the big one. How do we get out of here? The change that has happened to me in my life is nervous system regulation, healing the core wounds. Why? Because when you reparent yourself, you are changing your addiction to chaos. Why? Because you're telling yourself you deserve more than chaos. You deserve love, validation. You deserve approval, no matter if you succeed or fail. So important, so important. You don't only worship yourself when you succeed, you worship yourself when you fail too. Because now you're recreating how your neural pathways fire and telling them, oh, I'm not only getting approval when I succeed, you're saying I'm getting approval irrespective. I'm loved irrespective. I'm validated irrespective. The reparenting is especially when you find yourself in moments of failure, you go back then, you tell yourself, you are loved, you are safe. Safety, you can think about it, right? What is the opposite of like that heightened sense of chaos and all the things that are bad for you? Feeling safe, calm, and grounded, right? And so you start creating that pattern for yourself and your inner child. What your child needs is not the boundary. They need that level of regulation and safety, doing it together, holding them while you do it, making them feel that level of safety so that that becomes the norm towards which they start working towards. Things that all of us here didn't have. And so when we start, and predominantly the anxious attachment identifies with this even more so because for the avoidant, emotions were not safe, but it wasn't necessarily just the environment. And so the avoidant just sits with themselves with no access to emotion. But for the anxious, they have a heightened sense of emotional activation. So the nervous system is always jacked. Even if you're an anxious avoidant, if you're a disorder, it's the same thing. It's like the nervous system is jacked. So then the answer here is reparenting to create more safety, regulating the nervous system continuously. Why? Because when you start regulating your nervous system, even when it's not dysregulated, remember, so if you're regulating it just every day in the morning, you're regulating it just when you're sitting by yourself, you're creating a norm, and that norm is safety. As you start doing this, here's what will happen. Doing last minute work the next time, you'll start to feel uncomfortable. You won't start to feel the same level of heightened pressure and you're like, oh my God, why am I doing it? But still feel alive. You'll start to feel uncomfortable because you'll realize that this pattern is not stimulating you as much anymore. So you'll start to say, okay, what should I do then? I don't like feeling like this. It makes me feel like shit. Not the kind of shit that I'm like, yeah, good drug shit. Like shit, like, oh God, I just feel like not happy, not stimulated. That's when your mind starts to get motivated to do things a little more and a little more and a little more in advance. And as you do them, you'll realize after the continuous practice of both these things, nervous system regulation, creating self safety for yourself, you'll start to realize that you will get joy in doing small things continuously rather than just the big thing right at the end. Your validation will not come from you making the 100-meter sprint and daddy coming and giving you the medal. It'll come from you reparenting yourself on the marathon every step of the way and say, this step is important. This step is important. You're doing so well, baby. You're doing so well. I love you. You're on the right path. No matter what success or failure, that is what creates nervous system regulation. Once you get rewired to now love this method of regulation, I swear to you, you will find that version of sex, those version of relationships, you won't find them toxic. You'll find them boring. As soon as they come into your life, this is probably one of the biggest changes that's happened in my life because I love that. And I was like, oh my God, great sex. I'm like, I love sex. Like, this is the best feeling to have. And then I realized when I started getting into this, I was like, no, this sucks. Like even the people, when they come in, you're like, you're so unattractive to me. I don't know why, but I just am not into it. And that's how we start to find stability and security more attractive. It's not supposed to be done only when you're stressed because then your ego will take over and it'll say, no, I don't need this. I need to stay stressed. So you need to do this when you're calm. You need to validate small steps. You need to validate small wins and small failures. You need to validate yourself just as you are, the safety of you, the journey you're having, all of it. Hey, and welcome to the Inner Yats YouTube page. If you like our content, make sure you click the like and the subscribe button so that you get more of these amazing videos that keep coming your way.